Hello and welcome to episode 5 of series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from The Big Picture People. Again, I said on the last episode, but just a quick thank you for everyone who's contacted us to express an interest in being an interviewee on the show. If you're interested in being a guest, get in touch with us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk or go to engagingic.com and click on the contact form there. We are looking for guests for later on in the series. And if you're interested in being a guest, if you've got something you'd like to talk about and take part in an interview, which normally takes about an hour for the process, not an hour's worth of recording, but just an hour just to make sure that everything's working okay, just a bit of setup time and recording the interview, which normally lasts between 25 and 35 minutes. So just coming up in the next couple of episodes, just to give you a heads up there, we have an interview on the next episode, which is going out on the 14th of March, which is episode number 6 of this series, with interview with Mark Carpenter. Mark's going to be telling us all about how we can use stories to teach, lead and inspire in our internal communications, which is a very popular topic. We've covered that a number of times. And then in the episode after that, which is on the 28th of March, I have an interview with Muriel Clausen from Anthill. And again, another very popular topic, which we've covered before, but I think is still highly relevant, and particularly in our new age of digital communications, where we're much more comfortable using digital comms and we have a mixture of people working in a hybrid way. We're going to be talking all about how we communicate with frontline employees, and often forgotten and ignored really important groups, whether we work in service industries or manufacturing or any industry where we have people who are not sat in front of a desk, sat in front of a computer, very easy, and also out on the road as well, very easy to forget those people and focus our communications purely on those who are desk-based. So Muriel is going to be telling us all about the importance of that and giving us some ideas and tips on how we can engage better with our frontline employees. And that's probably it for this. I'm not going to talk anymore. So as I said, anybody interested in being a guest, get in touch with us and we can set up an initial conversation to see if you're right for the show and if you are comfortable with the process that we'll take you through to be a guest on the show. So anyway, that's all from me. Let's move on to today's interview. Just one little footnote before you listen to the interview. I've just noticed that there is a little bit of a syncing issue between myself and Shelby, who you'll be listening to on the interview. It does sound as though I'm interrupting Shelby, which, given the topic that we're talking about, might seem a little bit strange. So I hope it's not too distracting. I listened back to it and it's clear what Shelby is saying in the interview. And I don't think my interruptions, which aren't really interruptions, it's just a syncing issue due to the software that we were using when we recorded the interview. So I just wanted to let you know that that might be something that you notice, and I did know about it, but I decided that all in all, the interview is very, very listenable. Thanks very much. A recent article in Psychology Today discussed how in America, people routinely engage and witness aggressive or mean-spirited behavior towards each other. And incivility that occurs, it tends to happen online, where we've got issues such as shaming, political polarization, and that sort of thing. And we probably all recognize that. Any of us who look at social media or watch the news or read about some of the horrific stories of bullying and cyberbullying and other issues like that recognize that, particularly with social media, but also in other walks of our life, that incivility has become a big problem. Now, as an internal communicator, I'm guessing that a lot of your communications will go through quite a lot of filtering mechanisms. There'll be lots of checks and balances. But in general, within our organizations, we're not always in control of the things that are going on every day, and we're not always in control of the different types of communications that happen outside of our professional remit. But I think we all probably care about this. Civility is one of the things that we should be encouraging our colleagues to do, as particularly in our role as internal communicators, and we should be role modeling some of that. So what we're going to explore in this episode is what are some of the issues that we face when we are trying to deal with civility, and how can we help our colleagues to understand that engaging with people who have different opinions to you, different values, perhaps different ways of doing things, you can do that in a way that is civil, and you can have those disagreements, which all organizations need to a certain extent in order to move forward. If we have an organization where everyone agrees with each other, then that's probably going to lead to stagnation and no change. So we need to find a way to air our differences, to explore those differences, but to be able to do it in a civil way. Now, it might be that you think that isn't an issue in your organization, but I would also ask you to maybe think about your email culture as well. Now, I know this is just a specific example of this, but a lot of my clients, I hear, argue or disagree with the amount of emails that are going out and the way that those emails are sometimes toned, that can cause lots of disagreements and it result in ping pong email spats between colleagues. We all probably recognize that. So we're going to be looking at how we can engage with people who have different opinions. We're going to be looking at how we can call out uncivil behaviour and try to drive more civility within our organisations, but also how we avoid just turning into an organisation where we very rarely challenge, or we very rarely disagree with each other because we're worried about the reactions. It's not about that. It's about how we can air those differences in a way that is civil and not allow hostility and incivility to become a problem within our organizations. So that's what we're going to be looking at in today's episode, and we probably have one of our most distinguished guests that we've ever had on the show, who's going to walk us through her different perspectives and her ways of helping organizations to increase the amount of civility and reduce the hostility within their communications. My guest today is Shelby Scarborough. Shelby began her career with the White House as a member of President Ronald Reagan's advance team, where she helped to coordinate such landmark events as the Reagan-Gorbachev Moscow Summit. She then served as a protocol officer in the US Department of State, and in 1990, Shelby founded Practical Protocol LLC, which is a company that plans bespoke events for foreign dignitaries such as Nelson Mandela, Pope John Paul II, and Lech Walesa. Shelby's experience in both the public service and private sector have given her a unique insight into the practices that have led to positive and productive relationships and communication between individuals, countries, and societies. Shelby resides in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she is a speaker, entrepreneur, and writer. So, hello, Shelby. How are you?
I'm just great. How are you, Greg?
Very well, thank you. And I've already answered one of the questions I normally ask my guests, which is where are you based? But I've already said you're in the San Francisco Bay Area. So just paint a little picture for us what it's like there today in San Francisco for those poor souls who are across the other side of the Atlantic in the dark and cold at the moment. What's the weather like in San Francisco?
Well, for those who don't think that we have seasons, we do. And I'm looking out the window at a tree-filled area that's all bright yellow leaves that are about to just drop all over the place. And it's a bright blue sunny day,
Oh,
so it's nice. We got the best of both worlds here.
excellent. Great. Well, I think I can honestly say that's probably the most distinguished, and this is no offense to any of my previous guests, that's probably the most distinguished bios that I've, it's very rare, I think, in the bios that I've had from my previous guests that we've mentioned, kind of Gorbachev, Reagan, Mandela, Lech Walesa. There's some, and obviously Pope John Paul II. So there's some real A-listers there. So tell us a little bit more about that journey, but also about your current work as well.
Certainly, certainly. I was really lucky as a young person to be sort of, I guess, right place, right time. But I that's a whole another discussion about putting yourself into a position of opportunity. But I was given the opportunity to prove myself in the President Reagan's White House at about 22 years old. So I always kind of chuckle when I hear I make sure to put the word in helped coordinate the Reagan Gorbachev summit, because at 22 years old, that's kind of lofty, to be the person. So I was one of a team. I was one person who went with the team over, and that was what we did. We went around the world preparing for presidential visits. And that was every detail that you could imagine, where they would stand and where they would sit and when they would greet somebody and who would be there. And all of those kinds of issues, and work with the Secret Service and work with the communications office and work with the speechwriters and all of those people to kind of be the hub of the wheel to coordinate all the logistic details. So we weren't developing the policy, but what we were doing was setting up the situation so that the president could be the president and not worry about how he got someplace, or how many steps it was to something, or which elevator to use. Those kinds of things were all thought through ahead of time and in excruciating and amazing and beautiful detail.
Mm, mm. I used to get quite scared when I used to work in a food business, and we used to have to arrange and coordinate visits when some of our senior VPs came across from the States to visit our facilities in the UK and in Europe. And again, it was very kind of rolling out the red carpet and making sure that everything was clean. And we thought about their tours, but again, I think what you were doing there on a different level, so it's incredible. So
Well,
excellent.
it's a good point,
um,
because I grew up in the Burger King business. I grew up making hamburgers with my family as my parents went into Burger Kings when I was about 15 and built a lot of them. And so I managed to, I think that part of that upbringing helped me with my work at the White House and the State Department as a protocol officer, because the attention to detail and customer service is very much the same. It's about the customer, and the customer
mm,
was President Reagan, or the customer was the Queen of England, or the customer. I kind of looked at it that
mm.
way, and the terminology is a little different, but some of the skill
Mm.
sets are all very, very similar.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyway, to move on to the topic that we're going to talk about, which is related to what I was talking about there in your in the introduction, I'm going to quote something that you shared with me, which is a recent Psychology Today article, which discusses how Americans routinely engage in and witness aggressive and mean-spirited behavior towards one another, and nearly all of us find this as a problem. Much of the everyday incivility we see occurs online. Cancelling, political polarization, shaming, piling on. These are just a few examples of incivility and social behaviors that have become commonplace, especially through social media. And I can tell you that's not just an American phenomenon. That's that we see that across here in the UK and Europe as well. So it's a huge it's a huge area. It's a huge area of concern, I think, in terms of moral decay, and particularly when we hear stories. I'm sure it's similar in the States of kind of bullying of young people as well at schools and in colleges. So tell us a little bit more about, obviously that's your area of one of your areas of specialism anyway. Tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on that. And you, as I said, you provided that article, so I'm not claiming any research credibility there. That was you provided that to me.
Yes, it's I marvel at actually part of what it says, because it says Americans routinely engage in it, and more and more, and yet nearly everybody thinks it's a problem. So isn't there some irony in that? Is that if
Mm,
we see tons of it, but nearly everybody thinks it's a problem, what's the deal? why, why wouldn't it get
mm,
better if everybody thinks it's a problem? So somehow we are engaging in it. We are somewhere along the line, and so one of the things I find is that a lot of people point fingers and immediately say, that person, or how do I get that person to behave better? And one of the premises in my book, Civility Rules, is that it's not about changing the other person. As much as I would like to sometimes, and as much as we all would like to change the person sitting in front of us, we have a responsibility only to behave and show up in the world as best as we can. And our responsibility,
mm.
unfortunately, cannot, it may be a great desire to help change the other outside of the world, but we can't necessarily do that except by exhibiting our own behavior in a way that we feel is the right way to live.
Mm, Mm. Yeah, it reminds me of. I was talking to a client the other week about this, and we. I was running an event for them, and they were talking about, it was like their team and all the things that they thought that if they could change it would get out of the way and would help them to be more productive and have better relationships with each other. And it wasn't civility that they raised. They raised emails, and everybody complains
Hmm.
about how many emails they get, and particularly in corporate life. And it was a very similar cyclical argument, which was, how many do you send? Well, I send quite a few, but I get too many as well. And it's a little bit like, it's a similar thing, is that you got to kind of, change starts with you. If everybody recognized that I'm contributing towards this and did something to try and stop it, then wouldn't that mean that actually that would create a positive critical mass that might erode some of this that's going on, and might actually change the way that we communicate with each other? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's ironic, isn't it? That yeah.
Yes.
So I just want to. So I think we all probably recognise that we all see it as a clear and present danger, and something that we need to do something about, and that we need to accept that we have a role in that. But if we just drill into that a little bit more, because I guess I get it is a kind of a recent phenomenon, as in, I think social media is the article there that we referenced, has fueled a lot of this sort of anonymity behind some of this stuff, or the lack of being able to see the other person that you're being uncivil to is a kind of a kind of a contributing factor to a certain extent. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Particularly when we're looking at, and I guess we're talking social media in terms of external, when we're looking at this from an internal commerce perspective. But I guess that some of this definitely leaks into, internal communications between people within organizations. It's not just, people on Twitter having a spat with each other. It might be people having an argument through email, or through an instant messenger or other channels, and being uncivil that way. What do you see as the connection or disconnection between the role of social media, or the lack of sort of eye to eye contact that contributes to this in some way? Or is that just not a factor? It's just something else going on there.
No, I think it's 100% a factor, and that it definitely has contributed. But the again, the point there and the irony there is that people are doing it. So I guess there's a lot
Mm,
of talk about algorithms, and there's a lot of bots and people and nefarious people out there trying to foment um, discord, because it's politically expedient in some ways to do that. Even state actors who are taking part in it, but we can't control that, right? And we have to have a little bit of faith
mm,
in our governments to be on the watch out for that kind of activity. But at the day to day level, for us to, we have control of our own actions. So I have to say, I have a social media feed that is really very positive, and I keep wondering why why there's so much garbage out there that comes into some people's feeds. Well, there are things called algorithms.
mm,
And so there's a tendency that if we look that up, or if we participate in it, maybe that's a clue. If we get a lot of it in our inbox or in our social media, maybe we are participating a little bit too much, because I don't have a lot of that. I have a lot of very positive things come into my social media, and the very few that come in are like in direct response to, say, an article that I put out there, an ad that I put out there for my book, that I have an assessment that somebody can say, "How civil are you?" And I've had a negative comment or two there of people saying, "Well, I don't want to give you my email," and kind of responding in a nasty way, which I think is kind of funny. So don't give me your
yeah.
email. It's okay. I'm just asking you if you want to test yourself and see, do a gauge. People like to do self quizzes, and so because we are all a little bit narcissistic in that way. So if we're getting, I think the
Mm,
question
mm,
is, if you're getting a lot of nasty stuff in your feed and you see a lot of terrible, uncivil stuff, then there again we have to take responsibility, because I don't get it. I have very positive feeds, and I have to think of it because I'm not putting it out there.
yeah.
I'm trying to put
Yeah.
positive things
Yeah.
out in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I guess you've alluded to that a little bit there, which is this. I guess the dilemma is and the people who put their hands up and say, you're trying to control me, you're trying to, it's lack of freedom of speech and all that sort of thing. And I know one of the things you
Hmm.
you you talk about is that difference between civility and political correctness, and what's the difference, and so, are we being disingenuous perhaps by not saying what we think, and by saying what we think, where do we hold back, and where do the filters should lie on that? I mean, what are your thoughts on the difference between political civility and political correctness, and what's the difference between the two, and where should we try and find that balance, if that's such a thing is possible?
Yeah, and this is such a tricky topic these days because you could be, quote, canceled for saying the wrong thing. And this is a very, as you say, a very slippery slope. And I find it a disturbing trend because most people are really not, having the, how should I say it? Their intent is not to offend somebody, most people. And so if
Mm,
they say something that is out of political correctness, that is out of favor in this season of our evolution as human beings, it's usually not meant to offend. And I think that that's
mm,
where we have to give people a little bit of latitude and a little bit of benefit of the doubt that their intentions are to have a good conversation. Now, I think we can tell the difference, but having somebody else correct us as well, you just said something that's racist or something that is really disturbing in the society because I think it sets up a no-win conversation, and I'm about win-win
mm,
conversations. So it's not again not
mm,
my job to correct somebody else. It's my job to behave in a way that I think is of good character and with good
mm,
intent and well meaning and with heart and compassion and empathy and humility. And if I behave that way, then the likelihood of me making a misstep that is going to bring me to cancellation is a lot less, I believe. And I'm not afraid of cancellation. I believe that that's an aberrant behavior in our society that is just as uncivil as yelling at somebody. And so it's really not
mm,
the way to
mm,
go. It's not the way to bring society together. And that's the point of everything in
mm,
my mind anyway. That's my goal, is to bring us together, not divide us. And political correctness is gotten way out of hand. I understand that there's a time and a place to understand the nuances in a society. And it's sort of like
mm.
learning when you learn a new language. If you learn the language from the with I spent a lot of time in
Mm.
restaurants. So from the restaurant staff in the country, that you're going to tend to learn slang, right? You're going to tend to not learn
Yeah,
the which is fun because it's nice. It's fun to learn the shortcuts in a language, but to learn the things that are offensive in that language, and that's what comes out of your mouth as a new speaker of that language. It probably isn't going to make you a lot of friends. So I understand that we need to
yeah,
be um, we need to be courteous in our discussion, but the manners and the courtesy and the aspect of civil political correctness falls right into this continuum, which is if you think of courtesy as a bridge between two people or a bridge between two countries, and the cars on the bridge are the manners of that, the etiquette, the manners, the way you're supposed to behave at this period in time. If you think about them as cars have changed over the time, but they still are vehicles to get from one place to another. So the look and feel of it
mm,
has
mm,
changed over time. So I get that we need to be aware of the evolving situation in our lives and to be courteous to other people. But it's gone a little bit amok. And if you think of it again as cars on a bridge, it's like they're changing the bumper on a car and expecting everybody to notice all the time. So it's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. Mm,
give us a little bit of latitude. Give the other person in front of us a little bit of latitude that they're not meaning to insult somebody, and that they're not
mm, mm. And I think
inherently racist if they say something that is not politically correct at this moment, because it's going to change tomorrow. I've been
mm.
around a long time and I've seen it change.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer myself. I've kind of seen some huge shifts, and kind of things that were abhorrent. It would be abhorrent nowadays, which were just cultural a few years ago. Which and that's not to say they were right back then, but that it was when you're ignorant to certain things, you don't know, and yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, just building on that, then going into what I wanted to talk to you about next. next with, which is, and it's not necessarily about things that are around political correctness. It's not just limited to that, but how can, what are some of the ways? Because we try to keep this podcast as practical as possible, and I think
Mhm.
helping educate people or help people, to guide people to say, okay, there are right ways and the wrong ways. There are civil ways and uncivil ways of having different opinions. And, we don't want everyone to be the same. We want people to hold different views. That's fine. And what diversity is all about, and how we challenge and how we debate those views is absolutely key to this. So what are some of your ideas or thoughts about how we can engage with different opinions in a civil way, or we can encourage people to do that in a civil way that doesn't cascade into this, kind of spat and aggression and piling in, as this article talks about?
Well, as you know, here in the States, it's about to be Thanksgiving, and we're coming into a holiday season. So, and Christmas in the UK, et cetera. And we've got, and many other holidays, right? Jewish holidays, et cetera. And so we have the opportunity to be with our family for these things. And sometimes that runs into the closest we have to um, degradation in civil conversation when it should be the most joyous time, right? Uh, but because it's a little easier to pick a fight with your siblings or your uncle or your parents or something if they differ with you, because there's not as much formality there in some ways. So we feel a little bit more empowered to speak our mind. And actually, I would suggest that in the workplace or in the family dinner table, that the way to deal with that is to keep the peace. And the attitude for me, the way I look at it, and again, this is how I try to live, okay? And it's a practice. I call it a practice of civility, because you have to keep doing it. It's not, you have to be good at it. You can get rusty. We can get, again, this word triggered is a trigger for me, but the idea that, that something is going to upset us. Yes, things do upset us when we disagree with them, but we are in the control of our own response to that. And so I ask myself, how important is this relationship to me? And if the relationship is very important, then I really try extra hard to choose my words that are in line with what I talked about before, with compassion and with empathy and with patience and humility, coming at it from a perspective of a learner and not a teacher, which is, to me, is fairly important. I mean, we all have some expertise in our life after a certain period of time on this earth, but we can all be learners, and that's the humility aspect of things. So open ears, open eyes, closed mouth. And my sister says, listen to learn. And I added to the discussion in my book, I added learn to listen. And so on these podcasts, it's always funny because I talk a lot. But one of the things that I try to do um, with people, especially people I disagree with. It's real easy to be enthusiastic with somebody you agree with. But when you disagree, is to listen really hard. I try to listen and say, and to try to understand where they're coming from and inquire more. And instead of offering my opinion back or trying to correct them or make them believe something different, I try two things. One is to ask them further questions so that they can elaborate more on how do you that's a very interesting concept. I haven't heard that position before, or I hear that position a lot, and I have a slightly different viewpoint, but I'd like to hear why you think that. And having really curiosity, genuine, open-hearted curiosity about why somebody thinks something different than we do. And if we care about the person, then that's a really valuable way to approach it. If we don't care about the person, why bother picking a fight and creating a situation? And so to me, there are times when we need to uh, end something, or when we need to walk away from something, or we need to say this isn't right. And but those, I find that latitude I have a lot wider latitude on that than it seems like a lot of people do these days. It feels like the consensus out there right now is that the minute you hear something that you think is off, that you need to be the one to correct it. And I don't feel that that's my job. I feel like my job is to try to understand other people and try to grow a relationship based on the common things that we have in place and not the differences.
Yeah, that's one. That thing you said there. Finally, I mean, all of what you've said there, I resonates with me. But that point that I remember working in a very heavily unionized business when I was in my one of my managerial roles in my corporate life, and I remember always. Um, and it was the managed, and looking back on it, the organization was adversarial towards the union, and the union were adversarial towards the organization. It wasn't, but if you were a manager, you perceived it was the union's fault, and then if you were in the union, you perceived it to be the organizer. But so it was one of those kind of horrible impasses that where there was never ever we were going to see eye to eye. So one of my strategies always was, and these guys who I used to deal with locally, they had a union flag that they had to carry, and that always, to a certain extent, I'd always try and engage with them on a human to human level. Not, and I wasn't trying to play games, and I wasn't trying to manipulate them. And I'd always try and start meetings with them is to sort of, find, we're gonna talk about things that we're not going to agree with, or we're going to have to talk about how we agree on them. But let's kind of kick off by talking about the things that we do agree on. And for me, it was always about, I tried to embody this in the way I managed the team and the office. Was like, I do really care about everybody in this office, and I want to make sure they've got jobs in the future, and they've got careers, and that they've got future employment, and that's one of my kind of drivers. And I think you want that as well, from as a union person, regardless of how we get there. We recognize that. So I think recognizing common ground. And it's usually when you do that, you find you've probably got about 80% of things that you agree on. And it's only about 10 to 20% of things you don't agree on. And that's always a good place to start those sorts of things. Obviously, if it's the other way around, then that's going to be a much tougher conversation. But yeah, I like that. And I think the other thing that you just talked about there, which reminded me, of how we respond to that, and a question, I guess, back to you, which is, your family analogy, I get that. It's really kind of, we will probably that resonates with all of us. I think that's one of those probably universal human experiences. But is there does civility extend to sometimes just biting your tongue and not saying anything, or is that something else? So is and I know you've said that if you care enough that you're going to say something and you're going to try and want to engage with someone. But I've been in those situations in family things, and I've just thought, you know what, I'm just not going to respond to this. I'm just going to
Mhm.
bite my tongue. I totally disagree with what you're saying. That kind of undermines my soul a little bit, because I want to challenge you on that. But I know we're not going to get anywhere on this, and it's a pointless discussion. Where does that fit on this idea of political correctness and civility, and is that just a cop out?
Yeah, no, I think that it's wise in many cases. Is there's just no point in some cases. It doesn't, there the negative energy that an uncivil person puts out there it burns out eventually. They lose friends. Those kinds of things are going to happen. So why I don't I, by coming back at somebody in an equally uncivil way, what's it
Mm,
how, there to me that's just doesn't make any sense. Now, it doesn't mean I
mm,
haven't done it. So, I mean,
yeah.
I'm human.
Mm,
I'm going to state out here real clearly that this is a journey for me too. But I have found that as
mm,
I've evolved in this practice, that the more I put love out there and the less I try to correct somebody, or the less I try to chastise somebody or to put them in their place, which is so tempting, so tempting. The better off I feel, and it's a very selfish act in some ways. I have a better life. My life is happier
mm,
because of it. And so if I think of it as,
mm,
if I'm happy, then I'm putting it out there in the world too. So there's a there's a an inverse relationship for me with joy and civility, which is basically the idea that we, if the more joy we feel, the more civil we are, and the more civil we are, the more joy we will feel. And so for me, if you want
mm,
to look at it
mm.
from a self-centered standpoint, boy, that's a great way to live, because I give myself all those joy juices every day when I engage in the world in a civil way.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good way, a great way of looking at it, I think. And I want to just go on to just to, I'm conscious of time. Is and it links to what we've just been talking about, how to call out uncivil behavior. And I guess, I deliver some training for clients around, kind of the difficult conversations, and definitely labeling it as behavior rather than, kind of, labeling someone as you're an uncivil person, but recognizing that actually your behavior is what I'm finding as uncivil. Are there techniques and approaches that we can learn to do that in a way that doesn't create even more adversarial reactions?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to tag on to what you just said is to, again, taking the personal responsibility. So if you're uncomfortable in a conversation and really just feel like it's time to end it because it's bringing up a lot of
Mm,
emotions or it's bringing up feelings and you're tempted to go to a place that you don't want to behave yourself. So I'm going to raise that. If I'm going to turn it around and do exactly what I'm trying to talk about, which is if I find myself in a situation that is not tolerable to me, then I need to take personal responsibility to go ahead and exit the conversation. And I still try to do it civilly and model the behavior I want to see. So the way
mm,
I try to do it is to say, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm not feeling very successful in this conversation. And I would like to, let's talk. If you need to be sitting with that person for the next 10 hours or something, and perhaps it's about resetting the stage and say, let's talk about something that we can laugh about, or let's talk about, changing it to a place
mm,
that we can find common ground. If it's about just ending it and moving on, then it's like, I just think we should probably call it a day and go our merry way. Thank you so much. With no sarcasm, with no
mm,
irony, with no dripping, you know, um, double entendres, which is just so hard because we just so
mm,
badly as humans sometimes have that little switch in us that just wants to just bring the lion out. And I get it, but this now,
mm.
of course, I'm talking about this as situations that are about discussion. I'm not talking about physical harm situations or anything that is
Yeah,
dangerous.
yeah,
And this is where again we need to
yeah.
get to society. Our line has gotten a little blurred as to what's dangerous. And having a
Mm,
disagreement or disagreeing on politics or on upbringing of children or managing people or whatever it happens to be, collegial behavior, those are just disagreements. They're not, you know earth ending kind of things. Whereas if you, especially as women, I go there, but men and women are equally at risk in the outside world. And if we're in a
mm,
situation, if I find myself in a situation that is physically dangerous, I mean, telling somebody to back off or speaking loudly and making your voice, your power known is as far as I'm
mm,
concerned, that has to work for me. I had somebody approach me many years ago in Italy. I was walking home from the beach by myself to our little Airbnb, and I was wearing a little sundress, and this guy followed me, and it was a kid, really, came up to me, and I,
mm,
I didn't think of him as a threat at first, and he came up and he pulled on my skirt, on my dress, on the bottom
mm.
of my dress. And I looked at him and I said, you can imagine what I said. Okay. So imagine all the anger, all the
Yeah.
rage, all the things that we feel when we
Mm,
have a difficult conversation with somebody. I was threatened and I made it known. And he fortunately ran away and then peeked around the corner back at me. And I kept yelling and at the top of my lungs. And I got into the
mm,
hotel, like, got myself into my Airbnb. And that's when my knees went to powder and
mm,
I
mm,
started shaking and everything. But the things that rise up in us, this adrenaline rush that we get sometimes when we're angry, is another thing to do is be aware of that. Our body, understand our body and how it's reacting to something. So if we find ourselves
mm,
with that
mm.
anger and rage coming up, even when we're just talking to somebody, that's a sign that we need to take a deep breath and stop and slow down and not react in a way that may damage something permanently. If we care about the
Mm,
relationship, that's, to me, that's an important place that I try to stop myself.
mm,
If I don't care and I really need this
mm,
person to exit, such as the person who was trying to pull my dress off on me, then that's a fight or flight. That's where, that's the area where, okay,
yeah.
fine, use your voice, use your power, and get them away, because that's a
Mm,
danger situation. We really are not in
yeah.
danger
Quite
most of
right
the time we're
too.
talking to somebody.
No, and I think it's that it's interesting, isn't it? It's that kind of the kind of connection to our sort of reptilian primitive brains, which are hardwired for those sort of fight or flight situations, and sometimes we approach a verbal challenge and it triggers that very primitive response. I remember talking to someone who was telling me that the first you can put down and obviously not in the situation that you described in Italy there, that was quite appropriate in terms of the way you responded there, but in terms of a kind of a less threatening situation that we perceived is that whole kind of the 6 seconds that your kind of limbic system takes control of your neocortex, and in that 6 seconds, and that's why we tell kids to go into the corner and count to 10 when they're about to attack one of
Yes,
their siblings, or because it's that
yes,
cooling down mechanism that we need, and that reframing that's really important. And again, you see, I think that's again when we go back to what we were talking at the beginning. The social media is that people just are getting into that kind of cyclical, with no breaks, respond, fire back, wanting to throw the last shot, and it's just a disagreement. It's not a fight, and it's turning into our brains are perceiving it to be that we're under threat. So yeah, it's very interesting.
yes.
And
So
something else
being to your point,
you
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, just I'd love to come back to what you were just going to say. The idea that the fight or flight and all, just being aware of our, I think meditation and all of the sort of mind body elements of things are really great practices because it helps us get in touch with our own physicality and what's happening. And so becoming more self aware is a great way to go forward.
Mm. Definitely, definitely. So just to wrapping things up and thinking just around again, going back to the audience, and as you know, this podcast, and I think this is a really interesting area for our internal communications people to listen to think about, kind of their own sort of professional expertise, and also how they help this within their organization. And I'm just interested that if we have this incivility and hostility within our organization, and it's I know we talk about this becoming a bit of a new normal in society, but if I'm in an organization where that is becoming a challenge, other than the things we've already talked about, is there anything that you recommend, if it's just the sort of tone of the way we communicate with each other, maybe the way that we communicate with our teams, and obviously at this level I'm not talking about sometimes the not sanitized, but internal comms that's going out, it tends to go through a kind of an editing process and is reviewed for this sort of thing. But I'm talking more about the kind of day to day, communications between team members, between managers and their teams, and I guess between peers as well. Is what are some of the ways that we can educate people, other than, as I say, what we've already talked about, to be aware of this, and to make sure it doesn't become the new normal in our own organizations?
So, we have that person, not so many people are sitting in cubicles next to each other anymore, but we have that coworker or that manager or that subordinate, employee who just gets under our skin. And I think that would be a really interesting place to start is thinking about that one person that just gets you every time or doesn't get you every time.
Mm,
As far as, they make their voice makes your skin crawl, or their attitude is disturbing, or those kinds of things. And really, like, try to figure I would it would be fun to try to figure out, and taking it on as a joyful exercise of trying to figure out how to turn that person around in your head, not that changing them, but to look at it and say, how can I really connect with this person? How can I be the person that I want to see in the world, and go and befriend that person or find out what it makes them tick beyond the things that annoy you about them, because we all have that person. So how
mm,
can I turn this relationship around in a positive way and find something wonderful about them to celebrate, and then celebrate it? And I swear, I every time I do that, I just find out the most miraculous things, and it just opens my life and my world up and into something that is indescribable. And if I have that, you can come away with this amazing feeling. As I said, the joy juices, the oxytocin, the serotonin, the dopamine, those are natural things that we produce in our body, and we can make that happen for ourselves and for other people every single day if we put our mind to it.
Mm, mm. And I guess following on from that, then if you can do that with that sort of, because normally with these sorts of things, you start with someone who you have a minor spat, a minor disagreement with, and work your way up to the more the difficult end. But you actually, I like your approach, which is actually, if you can, it's kind of like, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. If you can find that joy and that connection with someone who is your least sort of likely best friend. Not that we're talking about turning them into best friends, but yeah, you're probably then likely to be able to use those skills on a much easier relationship. That's maybe where there's more minor disagreements around the edges, I guess.
Yeah, I'm thinking of several television series that I've been binge watching here and there, and the arc of the story usually goes. Its opening scene is people fighting with each other. I think even the TV series Friends, they start out at odds, and then they end up best friends. And if you think about it, and I know it's just fiction and television entertainment, but it's a winning formula. And why is that? Is because we all have this desire to bond with people. And there are people we're never going to bond with, and it's never going to be a deep and enduring love. But that doesn't, in a workplace especially, that's not the goal. The goal is to be productive and collaborative. And I thought of for some reason, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking the three C's. So maybe that's because I knew I was going to talk to you. It was collaborate, cooperate, collaborate, and communicate. And if we can focus on
I
those
like
from
it.
that are not, that's very pragmatic and practical and not woo woo and not, you know, um, third eye and all these things that are a little bit out there from a business perspective. But if we bring it right back to, if we have a mindset of collaborating, if we have a mindset of cooperating, and we have a really good practice of communicating well and closing the loop and being respectful that somebody who needs to know this information, who do I need to share this with to make sure that they're in the loop too. That's a big part of, miscommunication is such a big part of what happens in the workplace. So communicate, collaborate, and cooperate. That's a winning formula to me.
I like it. I like it. I like things that are easy to remember, but also work and a practical as well. So yeah, that's a really nice sort of area to think to close on. So, any final thoughts, Shelby? You've been very generous and you've given us some really I think some very thought provoking ideas there, and I think we can all, it's not necessarily just about going back into the workplace and writing a better email on that. It's actually reflecting on our own role. And I think going back to what we said right at the beginning, which is, be the change you want to be, the change you want to see. It's about recognizing that actually, maybe if I can role model this a little bit better, particularly if I'm a communication specialist, then maybe I can help my colleagues to sort of adopt that. But any final closing thoughts, Shelby? Just before I've got a few final questions just before we wrap up.
Sure, sure. I think of a story. We have people ask, we like in seminars and things and warm up conversations, conversation starters in networking events or meetings and things is, what's your superpower or what's your passion? What's your why? Simon Sinek says, what's your why, which is really popular, and really
Mm,
it's a good place to think about what our purpose on this earth is, because it's an existential question. And again, the self-centered person in us wants to know why we're supposed to be here, what we're supposed to be doing with our lives. And over
mm,
time, it can change over time. For me, it's become about creating a purposeful practice of civility and trying to encourage other people to follow the practice if they find value in it, because I know they'll find joy. Um, and so one
mm,
of the things that reminds me of that is that I was in charge of President Reagan's funeral. I was one of the deputy lead for President Reagan's state funeral in Washington, D.C. And we took, his body went from Washington, D.C. and all of the ceremonies that were the official state ceremony to have a final ceremony and be buried at the Reagan Library in California. So we had it totally timed so that we got on the plane. We put his casket on the plane, and all the guests on the plane that were going to California for the final ceremonies to land in California and have the ceremony happen just as the sun set. So it was all perfectly timed because he was a Western guy. So sun setting in the West, there's a lot of symbolism and things. So we were getting to the airport, and I was standing on the tarmac because I wasn't going to California. So I was saying goodbye to all of the people getting on the plane, his children, Mrs. Reagan, and then Miss Margaret Thatcher. So she was at the funeral, and she carried around a black dress with her wherever she went for the last years of his life, just in case it happened while she was traveling. And she was at the funeral and getting on the plane. And I said to her, this was in the later years of her life. And it was hard for her to travel at that point. And she didn't speak. We had a recorded version of her eulogy because she wasn't really in a position to speak at that point. But we played the eulogy because this was so heartfelt from her. And she said, I said, thank you so, so much for making the effort to come to this funeral, because I know that you were good friends and that it's just so beautiful to see you here participating in remembering President Reagan. And she said, basically 4 words, she says, my dear, it was my duty. 5 words, I guess. My dear, it was my duty. And I go back to what it is for me, is that this may be my why, this may be my passion, but I think it's what I can bring to the world. It's my duty to be civil in this world and hope that other people follow my lead or are encouraged to do the same, and that maybe then we'll see the change in the world that we want to see.
Fantastic. And I think that's a wonderful point, a wonderful sentiment and thought to close out the interview on, Shelby. So just before we end, I'd just like to find out if there's any links you'd like me to share with our listeners. So I was going to pop your LinkedIn profile into the notes. So if anyone would like to reach out to you and have a conversation with you about your expertise and your experience, and you're obviously wanting to do that, I thought that would be nice. And are there any other links you'd like me to pop into the show notes? I know you've got your book. Anything? Any websites or other links that you'd like me to share with the listeners?
Yeah, sure. And the easiest place to go is shelbyscarborough.com. And when my ancestors came over from Scarborough, England, they somehow, I think through Ellis Island, they misspelled my name. So I have one less O than most people there would spell. So it's Scarborough, Scarboroughh. It's the chopped up version of it, the Americanized version of it, I guess. So shelbyscarborough.com. But I did think that a lot of people would spell it the other way, so I also purchased it shelbyscarborough.com. So if you type that in, you'll get to my website as well.
Very, very wise. Very wise. Well, yeah, I'm probably about sort of 90 miles north of Scarborough, so that's quite appropriate. So, and I've been to Ellis Island as well. So there you go. I can visualize both of those places in your family's history. So wonderful.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, look, that's been fantastic, Shelby. I love what we've been talking about, and it's been a real eye opener for me, and also a reminder, I think, for me to make those extra efforts to be a little bit more civil. I think I do try, but we can always do a little bit better, not only online but also in interactions with loved ones, with colleagues, with clients. And I guess as part of that, I don't want to kind of kick off another conversation. That's part of the self-talk as well, about the way you talk about people in your head as well. I think probably directs the way that you respond to them in real life as well. So I think it's not just an external
Treat
dialogue,
yourself
it's an
civilly.
internal dialogue as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Treat ourselves
Absolutely.
civilly. Yeah. That helps, because low self-esteem adds to the instability in the world.
Absolutely. Well, look, I'll let you get back to that cranberry sauce that you made ready for Thanksgiving and all the other preparations that you're doing, and wish you a joyous Thanksgiving and a lovely Christmas. I know the show is going to be going out after Christmas, but we can all kind of we remember what it was like a few months ago or a few weeks ago when we were still looking forward to these things, I guess. So, but anyway, thanks, Shelby. You take care, and hopefully our paths will cross again in the near future.
I very much hope so. Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.